Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. 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 Though you are far away, wonderful story of love. Still he doth call today, calling from Calvary's mountain, down from the crystal bright fountain, e'en from the dawn of creation. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful.
All right, so chapter 14, if you're looking to title things, this is where it begins to focus on the plot to kill Jesus. Now, there were times when that attitude had already showed up. This is when it gets serious, and we are getting close to the end. So it says, it was now 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. For they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people. So there's a couple of things that you need to note. They're looking for how they can do this by stealth. What does that mean by stealth? Okay, secretly, without being detected. Why are they worried about not being detected? Okay, they were not being. Now, here's where it's interesting, and this is where human nature is interesting. Did they believe they were doing the right thing? Yes. So why would they be trying to hide it if they believed they were doing the right thing? Okay, they knew people wouldn't like it. That's implied in the text that we just read. That's one of the reasons why they wanted to wait till after the feast. The problem with the feast is there's going to be a lot of people there. There are going to be a lot of religious people there. There's going to be a lot of people, therefore, by extension, who view Jesus as a rabbi. And where there's more people, there's a higher chance of more problems. So if we wait till after the feast and the crowds dissipate and we're down to just normal people, the uproar won't be as big of a deal. Okay, so there's one aspect of it. But there's another aspect of it that's much more consistent with the nature of man. And that is, they knew they were doing, or let me rephrase that. They believed they were doing the right thing, but they knew that they were doing it the wrong way. They knew they weren't justified in what they were asking for. And they knew that they were plotting to kill a man. Listen, if the man's actually done something unlawful and worthy of death, all you have to do is what? Report it to the authorities and let the system do its job. But what they knew was there was no evidence. So they have to plot. And they have to work a plan to bring this to fruition. And they know that what they're doing is not proper. And when you do things that are not proper, how do you do them? Secretly. And even if you feel justified in doing it, which they did, to the point and to the degree that when he was actually on the cross, Jesus actually prayed to God, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. In other words, they weren't cognizant that they were carrying out the will of God. They weren't cognizant that they thought they were just killing a bad guy that they needed to get rid of. And how bad did they think he was? How dangerous did they think Jesus was? Very dangerous. How do we know that? Not just the way they killed him. That's a function to a degree of them using the Romans to do it. But who did they demand to be released instead of Jesus? You got to remember, Pilate wanted to let Jesus go. And so the way that he was going to make that happen, politicians never change. All right, I want Jesus to be let go. So how can I manipulate the crowd to where I get my desire? Oh, I know how. If I want Wesley to be let go, then I pick somebody like Maria, who everybody knows is a terrible person, and they'll unanimously say, well, we got to pick her because he hadn't really done anything wrong. And that's exactly what Pilate thought. By choosing Barabbas, who is a known murderer and insurrectionist, that certainly they would come off of this weird fascination with having Jesus put to death. That's the way he viewed it, because he actually came out and said, what? There's no guilt in this man. So he's going, okay, they've got this weird fixation on Jesus, but if I do this, if I use Barabbas, then the problem will go away. And they demanded Barabbas to be released to them. How many people go, yeah, send us a known murderer. We'll take him back into community. Well, actually, even there, they don't like it. No community likes known killers among them. You want to know why no community likes known killers among them? Because I'm afraid that known killer is going to kill me. I don't really care about you as much as I care about me. That's just the facts of the way the world works. And so they were so terrified of Jesus that having a murderer and insurrectionist turned back loose into the community to them was less threatening than have Jesus teaching people. Because really, that's all Jesus was doing. He was unarmed. About the most violent thing that he had ever done that we read about is what? Turned over some tables and ran some people out of a room. And yet they're terrified of him because they were terrified of what he taught. They knew that their fixation on seeing him dead was so great that they would do almost anything to make it happen. And by the way, what did they end up doing? Finding people that would perjure themselves, bear false witness against him, paying people to lie, doing all kinds of really underhanded things. When did they arrest him? Anybody remember? We're not to the story yet, but when did they arrest Jesus? In daylight? At night, in the middle of the night. And where had he been that day? In the middle of the temple. And he actually tells them that. You come to arrest me here at night? Look, I haven't hid myself. So why'd you come arrest me at night? It wasn't that you couldn't find me until now. Why did you come out here with the modern version of the sirens blaring and the automatic weapons pulled by the police in their riot gear? You know, the reason why they make arrests like that are twofold. Either one, the person has been almost impossible to find and they want to make it happen. And two, they feel threatened that this person has the power and ability to harm us. And Jesus says to them, look, you knew exactly where I was at the whole time, and I'm unarmed. And yet you come at me in the middle of the night with torches and weapons. As if, why did they arrest him in the middle of the night? because they didn't want people to know what they were doing. Because what happens when you unjustly treat people? It happens in our own time. People are unjustly arrested. People are unjustly treated by the authorities. What happens when people are unjustly treated by the authorities? What does the average person do? They get upset and they revolt and they speak out against it. Why? Because if it happens to you, it might happen to me. We don't like that. They didn't like it then either. It's one of the reasons they didn't like the Romans. Because they were powerless to stop the Romans from doing whatever they wanted to do. They didn't like that. And so we see that the motivation behind what they're doing is poor. And the way in which they're doing it is poor, and they're aware of that. All the while they feel justified. Because they're convinced that he is anathema. While he was at Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came up with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly. She broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, what's that word indignantly mean? Don't have to be a perfect synonym. Okay, they were offended by it. That's a good way to. They were like, well, how in the world could you do that? They were judgmental about the thing. Listen to what it goes on to say. Why was the ointment wasted like that? The fact that they thought it was wasted indicates what? Yeah, it wasn't worth, the situation wasn't worth that costly ointment being used. There's actually some more to that story, but anyway. For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii. This is expensive stuff. And given to the poor. And they scolded her. But Jesus said, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. You always have the poor with you. Whenever you want, you can do good for them. By the way, don't misunderstand what he's saying there. What he's actually doing is he's highlighting their hypocrisy. Now, if you're really concerned about the poor, every other day until now, you'd have been helping the poor. They've always been here. They always will be here. You can help them as much as you want to. You don't help them. And that whole argument that this could have been sold and the money used to help the poor is a Trojan horse. You'll not always have me. She's done what she could. She's anointed my body beforehand for burial. Now, this is what's important about this. Jesus actually uses this to teach something. Does this woman say in her mind, hey, I'm going to take this costly ointment and I'm going to go and anoint Jesus' body to prepare him for his burial because I know that he's going to die soon and I want to show respect and honor to him? No, that's not what's going on here. But Jesus uses her act of honor. By the way, it was an act of honor. She was trying to show some respect to him. He uses that to enlighten them further about what's about to take place. She's anointing my body ahead of time for burial. If that's what's happening, then what is implied? And he's going to die and there's going to be a burial. So that's what he's doing. Truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. I love that too, for so many reasons. But here's the best thing. Does God take note of the little things that we do? Even if the people around us criticize those things? And the tendency, and I know this is a tendency, well, maybe I need to be fair to other people. I don't know if it's your tendency or not. I know it's been my tendency over my lifetime. The tendency is when I do something, even though I know it's the good thing to do and it's the right thing to do, and I do something, if people criticize me for it, I go, I ain't gonna do that anymore. And I quit. Is that what our attitude should be? You know what I'll do? Even if they come to me and criticize me and accuse me to my face, if I know I'm doing something good, what should I do? Keep doing it. Why? Because I'm honoring God, not men. I'm trying to please God, not men. So there's a subtext lesson that comes up in this. And God was aware of it to the point that he enshrined it in Mark's gospel so that we're talking about it today. That's the point that Jesus is making here. Wherever the gospel is proclaimed, this story is going to be told in memory of her. By the way, that's even a third tertiary would be the term, a tertiary lesson in this text. Is it okay to memorialize and honor the good that people do? Yes. God just did it and told us about it so that we would know. And so it's okay for me to honor someone who has served the Lord faithfully and done good in the world, and to talk about what good that they have done. Now, if they're humble servants of God, they will tend to do what? Redirect that honor to God. But it's still okay for me to memorialize the good that they've done. Yes, ma'am. Which is a whole nother level of problem. That's a good observation. Appreciate you bringing it up. I just heard, I was listening to a book on my way up to the building this morning. And the lady was writing, and I'd like to lay the whole foundation down, but I'm not going to. But anyway, she made this observation. She said that she realized that at that point, she would not have been associated and continued walking in faith, that's her language, except it be at that church with that person present. Speaking about the particular pastor of that church. And what she is talking about in that book is realizing that's the wrong reason to be doing it. If it's got to be this place and it's got to be that person, then I'm not following Christ. I'm following men. And that's the distinction. Remembering the good that people have done, great thing. Raising them up to divine status, not so great. And yet, what do human beings do who are seeking followers? It historically has always been the same. The emperors or pharaohs in Egypt ultimately claimed to be what? God. The emperors in Rome ultimately claimed to be what? The religious leaders do the same thing. David Koresh did the same thing. Jim Jones did the same thing. I mean, you just keep on going. When you want to have and amass followers to yourself, that's actually what you claim for yourself. But that's not the way of Christ. And that's not the way of even Jesus, who was God, The whole time he was on the earth, taught what? And did what? Who did he seek to glorify? God, his Father. He taught, came not to do my will, but the will of him who sent me. He taught the words that I teach are the words that he gave me to speak. The things that I do are the works that he gave me to do. He was always glorifying the Father. And when we get to John 17 and that prayer that he offered shortly before his crucifixion, he then says that the apostles should glorify him as he did the Father. He was God. He was worthy of all glory and honor. But even he, in the flesh on earth, was directing the glory to heaven. We have to do that. And if people are not doing that, if people are not saying it's all about God, it's all about Jesus, listen to Jesus, we need to pay attention. If they're willing to accept that kind of power and influence on others, they're probably not following God. Well, I can do better than that. They're not following God. They may think they are, but they're not. Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money, and he sought an opportunity to betray him. This is an important passage. Verse 10 is extremely important because what we find out in verse 10 of Mark chapter 14 is not that Judas was drawn into betrayal, but that Judas was the instigator of the betrayal. He went to them looking for the opportunity in order to betray him. And they were glad. You know why they were glad? Because they were actually sitting there trying to figure out, what can we do? And the gift horse just walked up to them and says, hey, I want to turn him over to y'all. And they were like, cool. We'll even pay you. By the way, you don't pay your witnesses if you're seeking justice. And he sought an opportunity to betray him. So when he left there, he still was doing what? He was still plotting and looking and actively seeking the opportunity in which to do the thing that he was looking to do to begin with. This was all on Judas. On the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, well, will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover? He sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, go into the city. A man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. And wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, the teacher says, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready, there prepared for us. And the disciples set out and went to the city and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. I've actually read some commentaries that say, oh, Jesus clearly had been into town and talked to this guy ahead of time and had this all arranged. I don't read any of that in this. What they're trying to do is discount the fact that he knew the end from the beginning. What does the fact that Jesus knew the end from the beginning mean about Jesus? He's God. That's what this is yet another layer of proof that his claims are true. When it was evening, he came with the 12, and they were reclining at table, eating, and Jesus said, truly I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. Now, you can't get more clear than that. They're observing the Passover. They're at the table. He says, it's going to be one of you. They began to be sorrowful and to say to one another, is it I? He said to them, It is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread in the dish with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. Now that's an extremely important verse as well. It is one of the 12, he said, for the Son of Man goes as it is written of him. Okay, the prophets had prophesied of the nature of the betrayal. It has to happen this way. But woe to the man who does it. What does that tell us about the way prophecy works? It's still our choice. Even though God knows what's going to happen, it doesn't mean that he makes us do it. Prophecy doesn't mean that you lose responsibility. Why does that matter? Because the argument is, well, if I'm made this way, if it has to be, then it's not my fault. The same kind of reasoning happens with sin in general. It's prophesied that men sin, right? Well, then it's not my fault. Yes.
Even with our limited knowledge, when we know, somebody, especially a kid or a student or something, and you say, let's say, for instance, don't do this, but you can tell that they're about to go do that. And you can look at somebody and say, they're about to go do it. And they go do that. That's still their choice, right?
Right.
Me knowing that they were about to do that and change that. And that's limited human knowledge. And with God's
Unlimited knowledge. And there is a difference in the way that the technical way that I describe it is there's a difference between foreknowledge and foredetermination. Okay, those two things are different. God has foreknowledge. That doesn't mean that he forces people's hands. That means that he is aware of the choices that we will make. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. That's simply an expression. By the way, it echoes an expression that Job used of his own self. In the midst of his turmoil and trial, he said, it would be better if I had been born. If life is going to be like this, it's better that a man not be born. That's simply an idiom that means what? What's in store for the consequence of this behavior? Not good. Judas was going to be judged for what he did. Yes, sir.
Jesus knew how Judas would react, but in reality, up until the time that he hanged himself, he could have repented and asked for forgiveness.
Could have been, but he didn't. Yes, ma'am.
Judas falsely claimed that the perfume could be used for, I don't know if it was helping the poor or something, but it wasn't true. He did it because he wanted to keep back the money. I think he wanted to.
Yeah, he was the keeper of the treasury for the 12, and he stole from it. Yep. Now, let's have some real fun with this. Let's get to a secondary lesson. Not directly the point of Mark's lesson, but it is taught here. How did Jesus treat Judas? Just like the other 12. He ate with him. He knew. He knew who was going to betray him. He knew what was going to take place. He knew how it was going to happen. He's telling us, I know all this. Did he let it affect the way that he treated Judas? What about us? Does the things that people do to us affect the way that we treat those people? Should it? The answer is no. But does it? Very often, yes. Very often we do. Because he hadn't done nothing for me. I ain't going to help him. I don't have time for him. I don't care about him. He's right there at the same table. That's part of the point that Jesus is making when he points out, one who eats with me. And then he doubles down on that. One of the 12. And then he doubles down on it yet again. One who dips his bread in the same dish as I do. Meaning what? You're a participant at this meal. You're here right now. Yes, ma'am.
Little children, humbly, loving, regardless of whatever happens. It's hard to get there, but it's possible.
Yes, I agree with everything that she just said. That's what I intended to say. Wow. Just think about that. And the next time you're inclined to seek vengeance, remember Jesus at this meal with his betrayer. And by the way, when it gets down to it, and I don't think it's in this context, I could be wrong, but I think it's in another one of the gospel. When it really gets down to it, you know what he ends up doing? You know what Jesus' whole entire reaction to Judas is this night? What you do, go do quickly. The measure of self-control that is at play in those things is just amazing. And the point is, if he can do it, so can we. All right. Lord wills, we'll pick up in verse 22 of chapter 14 next time. Thank you for your presence and participation this morning. Good class.
Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful story of love, wonderful.